13 hours in the air gets me from Chicago to China. Lots of staring out the window, then dinner, breakfast, lunch, 5 movies, 6 magazines, 5 rum and cokes, and 2 Valium. Small price to pay for a shotgun blast to the other side of the world, to the other side of 5,000 years of a different way of doing things on planet Earth. Beijing and Shanghai in 10 days going to be frantic. I'll be documenting an educational tour, so I'll have to sneak away whenever I can to show you a glimpse of behind the curtain in these 2 proud, ancient, and quite different cities. As I approached my event horizon on the far side of the Pacific and fought off jet lag, I sensed it was going to be a wild ride. Sure started out that way. And that was just the day we arrived. That night, my dreams were not my own. Let China sleep, Napoleon said, for when she wakes, she will shake the world. And my dreams that night blurred through half-formed conceptions and ungrounded expectations, and always, throughout the night, floated the face of this guy, the progenitor of modern Chinese life. Birth, death, infinity. Breakfast in Beijing. How strange is this going to be? After last night's chopped razor-sharp chicken bones and their feet, this fare looks pretty reasonable, although rice for breakfast is a stretch. Then pancakes, beans, and Johnny cake in name only. What's wrong with this picture? Everything we heard warned of yellow-gray polluted skies and unbreathable air, and here we are on a blue sky sunny day. And a desire to stick together, because with Chinese characters for signs, if you get lost, it'll be forever. Even the graffiti is unintelligible. This could say anything from Free Tibet to For a Good Time Called Lu Chi. And this, my God, one has no clue, nothing.
Or anything like that.
Okay, what does it taste like?
It feels like a tongue. It's rubbery.
Thanks for sharing.
Yep.
Uh-oh. We've stopped the minibus to run into a bank for cash, when no sooner did we get swamped by some free market entrepreneurs. This could be good. A lovely assortment of genuine counterfeit Rolexes, Tag Heuers, and Breitlings, all tastefully displayed in a genuine fake aluminum valise with false bottom for the good stuff. Okay, here we go. Battle of the Titans. The wily Chinese communist with a passion for free market action, and the Mexican master, Jorge Rodriguez, descended from a long line of south of the border horse traders. Forget the Olympics. Let the games begin. In the preliminary, James scores a t-shirt made down the block an hour ago. Back to the main event. Looks like a deal has been struck, though how much and for what will never be known. Only a close reading of demeanor will tell us what we want to know. There it is, the handover of cash, and yes, the commie nods, that's good for him. The handover of watch, and another commie nod, but it's not over yet. Yes, there it is, the glinty glare of Montezuma's piercing gaze. From pesos to dollars to watch. Mano a mano. I'll call it a draw. standing here in Tiananmen Square, and it is huge. 1 million people can gather here to witness massive state-sponsored events. Or in one case, for a few days in June 1989, a student protest calling for freedom of speech and greater civil rights. Now don't forget, the communists won the Civil War and control over the Republic only 60 years ago, in 1949. And there he is, Mao Zedong, leader of the communist state, as it struggled to find its way in a new world, and many mistakes were made along the way, to put it mildly. Then in 78, a mere 30 years ago, Mao's successor, Deng Xiaoping, initiated the beginnings of a free market economy in communist China. What's wrong with that picture? Well, nothing apparently, for a mere 11 years later, the same man put down the Tiananmen Square freedom protests, killing hundreds of people, and thus China committed itself wholeheartedly to one of the world's strangest, most unlikely ideologies, communist autocracy and a free market economy. Well, the world is seeing firsthand how that's turning out for China and the world. And the young people of China now know virtually nothing of the freedom protests in '89. They happily sip frappuccinos in Starbucks and shop for clothes and iPods. They haven't been given a choice, but the choice is theirs for the taking, political or economic freedom. And after the freedom protests were put down, 150 million people were pulled out of poverty by market, not political reforms. Hard to argue with those numbers. Especially when many Chinese look to America, which has both freedoms, but a huge disparity between the rich and the poor, and the obscene greed of the rich. The Chinese see the American failures as a validation of their own hybrid system. Even so, China experiences 70,000 protests every year, mostly against corrupt officials and their own social inequalities, rich versus poor, and they protest against the loss of their homes and land for government projects, and against the often undrinkable water and unbreathable air. Though to see this beautiful blue sky day today has got to skew the pollution average a little to the good side. Are you seeing these faces? The faces of modern China? We know Donna as a professor in the engineering college, but this poor little kid will lead his entire life staring at the snapshot of himself in Tiananmen Square one bright sunny day in the arms of a golden-haired goddess from America, and musing how each day after that could never live up to his one brief moment in a Western fairy tale. I'm not ethnocentric, it was a joke. Entering the Forbidden City, forbidden because you couldn't enter without the permission of the emperor. Of course, now a few bills will buy you admission. Capitalism uber alles. The Forbidden City was the imperial palace of the Emperor of China from 1420 till 1912, when China became a republic. There are 900 buildings and 9,999 rooms in the 1/2 mile by 1/2 mile area. Anywhere around the world, whenever human beings are presented with smooth brass, be it lithe-bodied nymphs in Paris or merely the knobs on doors here in China, they do what comes naturally. They collectively buff it to a brilliant sheen.
Here Forbidden City, but now the name is the Palace Museum, because here opened for public in 1925. But when you see the movie Last Emperor, Last Emperor started work inside in 1911. How many people come here to build it before? 1 million. 1 million Chinese spent 14 years to build it. Emperor don't like it. Where's the new Forbidden City? Emperor want to build it. Emperor believe feng shui. Old Forbidden City. What kind of faculty here? I don't know you speak Chinese or not. In Chinese it's 仁义礼智信. If you some people go in from tunnel to kill emperor, emperor say this is not good. So when the emperor build it, emperor build 4 meter deep the bricks under the Forbidden City. But now you can visit some tunnels in Beijing. Here's a tunnel to dig by Chairman Mao in 1950. 1950 China run.
way to see one of the high points of the trip. I mean, the Chinese opera we saw last night was great, but today we climbed the Great Wall. It's good to leave the 17 million people of Beijing behind for a while, which, incidentally, is the world's largest construction zone. China is still 2/3 farmers, despite the massive migration to work in the cities, and driving through the countryside reminds us of the other China, the old China. After all the picture books and calendars and postcards, after all the videos and DVDs we've seen, the Great Wall does not disappoint in person. Look at that. Parts of the wall are ancient, but most was constructed by the Ming Dynasty from the mid-13 to the mid-1600s. It was over 4,000 miles long in its prime, but much of it today is in an unrestored, crumbling state. But not this part. Restored to its full glory, it really is impressive. But it is steep. As if just being in China wasn't education enough, occasionally we had to take some formal tuition. Dewey Chi's contacts gave us entree behind closed doors. Okay, Before we follow the group inside, let's sneak a peek at some top secret government contract work. What? Windows? Windows? No Russian Cold War knockoff interface? We'll find something. It's interesting to see a vibrant educational component in China. It wasn't too long ago, during the so-called Cultural Revolution in the 60s and 70s, that teachers were persecuted and sent to so-called re-education camps in the countryside. Now, these scholars enjoy a high degree of academic freedom, though it must be self-regulating because funding comes from the state. No wonder they're so good at ping pong. There's a table near every lunch break. China is the world's oldest continuous culture. Their written language is over 3,000 years old and can be read by all, no matter what dialect they speak. Think of it. They all understand the same written characters, but pronounce them in different dialects incomprehensible to each other. The chemical abstracts, however, can be understood only by the few. Holes. Gotta have holes. Looks like these will take just about any toaster you could plug in. Australian, British, or USA. What's happening here? Oh, testing tensile strength of something or other. And then logging it in, of course. Okay, while the others are engaged in the square root of all evil, let's see what we can spy behind closed doors. Some reverse-engineered alien technology from a distant province, perhaps? No, more like a bendable polymer for the new Skinny Willy toy from Mattel, I suppose. Yeah, I was right. Skinny Willy, soon available for $6.49 from a Walmart near you. Well, that was quick. Having just gotten over jet lag, we're already on our way to the second half of our trip. A few comparisons are in order, I think. Beijing, the keeper of the culture. Shanghai, the commercial center. Beijing, the political epicenter. Shanghai, the place of calculating, worldly-wise business deals. Beijing, with one foot in the past, Shanghai, both feet sprinting furiously into the future. The Olympics in Beijing, the 2010 World Expo in Shanghai, but both inscrutably Chinese. Both huge megapolises, both presenting themselves as shimmering, constantly moving reflections, an oriental Rorschach of unknowable politics and culture, projected onto a smoke wisp of ideology and visions of the future. In Shanghai, we're staying in dorms at the university. Dr. Chi's on the phone setting up our visitations for the day. We all hope for a day trip to some Chinese waterslide park, and he's thinking more of a lecture on thermodynamics as applied to airflow over a dimpled fixed wing surface. Without this man, we would starve to death on the street in China, so incomprehensible are the language and the norms. We could easily walk into a restaurant and, despite our best mimetic capabilities, end up with jellied water buffalo nose as the main course.
Put money.
Okay, this day, please select your fare. Which fare?
Three.
There's three?
How many units? No, but we need more than that.
Oh,
We need more than
this
that.
machine not right.
How many engineers does it take to buy a
Because this
ticket?
machine not acceptable. Yeah, they only have.
Oh, we need 10 tickets.
Yes, but this one won't accept paper money, just coin money.
Oh.
Paper sign.
There's one in any group. Give me a group of 4 or 5 people anywhere in the world, and there'll be one guy who'll do this or something like it just to kill some time. Ours is named Jake. There it is, the jewel among the monoliths, the Oriental Pearl Tower in Pudong. We're just across the Huangpu River from old Shanghai, on ground that a mere generation ago was swampy farmland. Shanghai is growing upwards like an ice crystal and now has 4,000 skyscrapers. New York, 2,000. Old Shanghai, under the Western powers, was the so-called whore of the Orient. New Shanghai is how much, how many, when you need it.
model 要看你的 model，
随跟希腊差不多呀，希腊里
他那看你漂亮，
是漂亮，那是
比希腊里他比希腊里大2岁，希腊里58。
那看不起，看不起，我操
You could be model.
What's 30岁
You say you only 30.
Okay, I wish I was.
Not an equation or a formula in sight today as we head out of town. Day trip with a boat trip, what could be better? Though I do wonder about the optimal airflow to angle of blade ratio on that twirler. Been hanging around with engineers too much, I think. Let's take a walk. I'll tell you a few things about the history of modern China. For 4,000 years, China has had a huge superiority complex. Even the ancient name China means Middle Kingdom, the center of the world, a civilization in the midst of barbarians. And except for a brief period when Europe and the West advanced after the Industrial Revolutions, and China became humiliated at their hands, the people of China have always had, and still do have to this day, this elevated sense of their place in the world. Their humiliation in the mid-1850s began when the British forced them to buy the opium made in British India. Nice deal for the British. Offset their huge trade deficit with China. They drank a lot of Chinese tea by forcing them to buy their opium. Well, the Chinese rebelled, fought 2 so-called opium wars, and lost both the wars and their self-respect. The Western nations even took over land in Shanghai, which was treated as their own sovereign territory and subject only to their own laws. Chinese humiliation spread beyond their shores as well. In America, immigrants were often regarded as subhuman and used accordingly. The Japanese invasion in the 1930s represents one of the worst atrocities ever enacted by human beings. The Japanese systematically murdered 300,000 defenseless Chinese civilians at Nanking. They had contests to see who could behead the most people in the shortest time. The Chinese make note, incidentally, that Japanese school textbooks use the words Hiroshima and Nagasaki often, and the word Nanking almost never. Which brings us to this guy, the man who changed China forever, the man who tried to destroy thousands of years of tradition and culture, the war hero who survived intense hardships to become supreme ruler of China in 1949. The man who declared, "Ours will no longer be a nation subject to insult and humiliation," who threw off the yoke of foreign oppression. And what the hell? The man personally responsible for the deaths of tens of millions of his own people? Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the chairman, the leader of the Communist Revolution, Mao Zedong. We'll get back to him later. In 1978, China had 193 cities. Now it has 660. Over 100 of these cities have a population of over 1 million people. Not to mention Beijing and Shanghai's combined 35 million or so. Some cities were built in the countryside for the sole purpose of the manufacture of one item, say zippers. 40% of all goods imported into the US come from China. Can you say massive globalization? Twins. What a lucky mother. Luckier than a mother with twins in other countries, because China has a one-child policy. Too many people. Something had to be done. So if you're a Han Chinese, which makes up 92% of the population, and you live in a city, you're allowed only one child. But people, being human, would get ultrasounds to discover the gender, and boys, being preferred to girls, would abort the fetus if it didn't have a penis. This practice is officially outlawed, but local officials, needing to make their quotas, avoid penalties, and keep their jobs, will often look the other way when parents fulfill their need for a little boy. So, the protection of a female fetus in the womb is a law sometimes honored, more often in the breach than in the observance. Saying, "Do you speak Chinese?" is like saying, "Do you speak European?" People from Beijing speak a completely different dialect than people from Shanghai. They can't understand each other's native tongue. Though in the 50s, the government made the Beijing Mandarin the de facto standard, so that now 80% of the country can understand it. Outdoor escalator, how about this? Busy corner in the high-rent shopping area. But as I said before, even though they pronounce it differently, they all understand the written language of 50,000 characters, most obsolete. You only really need to understand 4,000 characters to comprehend Chinese, maybe 900 to read a newspaper. This is a quiet, leafy area of Shanghai called the French Concession, part of old colonial times when Western powers owned parts of the city as their sovereign territory. Concession doesn't mean they sold food here. It means China conceded this land when they were in their humiliation period. The other Western powers had land in the Bund area by the waterfront, but the French, being French, needed to go their own way. Today, the French Concession is a lovely little oasis in a huge megapolis. All right. Get ready for something special. We're going to walk through a part of old Shanghai. I won't talk. Experience it for yourself. Maestro, give us your best stuff. Okay, back to the man who most changed China. You know him, you love or loathe him, Mao Zedong. After Mao survived impossible odds and came out on top of the Civil War in 1949, he became the supreme ruler of China. So supreme, he could order the killing of all the birds because they were eating much of the grain in the annual harvest, which directly caused the locusts and other insects to eat most all of the grain, which caused the famine and the death of 30 million people. All while Mao continued to export what little grain they did wrench from the greedy little insect mandibles. That was during the so-called Great Leap Forward, which disaster paled in comparison to the horrors of the so-called Cultural Revolution of the 60s and 70s. Mao tried to destroy all of the old traditions and culture of China. They ransacked the ancient temples and museums. They tortured and killed teachers and intellectuals. They created a gruesome reign of terror against anyone accused of free thinking or honoring the past or believing in art or literature or culture. They, of course, the people who carried out Mao's grand plan, were the Red Guard. The Red Guard. Young men, teenagers really, who rampaged across an entire country in a state-sanctioned, testosterone-fueled wave of terror. Teachers and scholars were denounced and sent to so-called re-education camps if they were lucky. Some were tortured if they were lucky. Some were killed, which, given the two previous outcomes, I guess you could say, if they were lucky. Books were burned. Anyone seen with a musical instrument was likely to be tortured and even killed. In the Red August, Mao said, "Peking is not violent enough. Peking is too civilized." The Red Guard maniacs killed 2,000 people that month alone. In one report from a far-flung province, it was claimed that the Red Guard tortured and killed the teachers and then ate them. Some deny this. Some say one faction of the Red Guard fought another faction, then killed them, and then ate them. But no culture or society has a patent on heinous behavior. This was China's in the 60s and 70s. The world has seen many others. Well, that's enough for now. I'll wrap it up later. In the meantime, it's warm and sultry tonight, a little in advance of the steamy oppression of the summer months. Shanghai seems quite a nice place to be at this point in time, at this place in space. Can't drink the tap water in China. Can't eat washed, uncooked vegetables either, or fruit cut with a knife because of the microbes in the water. In fact, 1/3 of all water in China, lakes and rivers, is considered unfit for industrial use. But here, in these delightful gardens in Suzhou, the Chinese have got it totally right. Perfect feng shui harmony, man with nature. The Chinese taught Japan and the rest of Asia everything there is to know about the ancient art of growing plants for contemplation and for pleasure. Here in the humble administrator's garden, it couldn't be better. The horrors of Mao's China in the 60s and 70s were a matter of degree, admittedly off the scale. Tens of millions of his own people died because of Chairman Mao. Some people say 70 million. That's Stalin territory. That's Hitlerville. After he died, the official line was that Mao's reign was 70-30. 70% good for China, 30% excessive. According to that proscription, Hitler was a naughty boy and Stalin was a weird uncle. Why then is Mao's face still everywhere in China? Because he was the champion of the destitute poor, the forgotten peasant masses? Do tyrants like Mao serve a necessary place in the history of nations? Could China be where it is today without Mao's throwing off the shackles of the past? The excesses of the emperors, the abject poverty of the peasants, the bullying of the Western powers? Could a black man, however qualified, ever be elected president of the United States of America without the constitutional and policy atrocities of the leaders who came before? Food for thought. Here along the Nanjing Loop on a warm, early summer evening. Deng Xiaoping began market reforms in 1978. Since then, one of the, hey, I'm walking here, green man and everything. They're absolutely crazy behind the wheel in China. Traffic lights are merely a suggestion. God. Screw it. Guy on the street selling DVDs. May or may not play on your machine. May or may not be in English. May or may not be as seen on the cover. But hey, they're cheap. Okay. It's 10 p.m. on a Saturday night. On our way back to the dorms, check this out. They're studying on a Saturday night. No booze in sight. And it ain't art or music, it ain't theater or dance. It's math and science. The future will belong to them. Shanghai thinks that Beijing is Hicksville with guys who spit indiscriminately on the street. Beijing thinks Shanghai is cold and calculating, not to be trusted, and that their men and women wear their pajamas out on the street. Guilty as charged, I guess, but oh, so comfortable on a sultry night like this. Unmistakable Shanghai skyline as seen from the old colonial Bund area. None of these buildings existed 20 years ago. Repeat after me. Ni hao, shi shi, wu yao. Ni hao, shi shi, wu yao. Ni hao. Last event in China, and indeed for this video, we're going to take a little ride on the water. This corner of China is designed to dazzle, and dazzle it does. I think part of our preoccupation with this country is that it is so huge in population. Sheer manpower is still worth a lot, especially if it's faced with abject poverty and grateful for its penny on the dollar. China's rise, too, has been so swift. Swift, it's been sudden. which has given us pause as well. I've never made a travelogue before that has been impossible to wrap up with the closure I'm attempting now, because it's all so new for us, China's rise. New for China and the world. Neither we nor they have quite grasped the present, much less the future. But one thing is fairly certain. The country that gave us paper and printing, the compass, gunpowder, matches, cast iron, the suspension bridge, natural gas as fuel, the propeller, the crossbow, the cannon, the rocket, ceramics, and yes, toilet paper isn't finished yet. Let's hope the future is as promising as the Shanghai skyline. Promising for China and for us.